You are listening to the Ready PDM Network.
Are you ready?
Hello, Ready Product Radio heads, and welcome to another exciting episode of Ready Product Radio. This week, we speak with Matt Sheridan, CEO and founder of Nix Sensor Limited, based in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Matt and his team have set out to create a tape measure for color. Matt tells us a story from his early childhood years tinkering on his home workbench, to being on the McMaster University Solar Car project team, to what spurred him to create a multi-purpose, low-cost color sensor. This episode is sponsored by Eigenworks, win-loss analysis and churn analysis that drive sales results. This week, we skip the introductory sound bites and jump right into our interview. Ready Product Principle number 22 is inspired by Matt's journey. Niche, 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 but also listen, listen, listen. Sure, start with a narrow niche, but also listen to early customer feedback. Let the market decide. Enjoy the show.
Are you ready?
Matt Sheridan, welcome to Ready Product Radio. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us this morning. We normally do a podcast here that is for product people of all different disciplines. So we talk to product managers, we talk to entrepreneurs like yourself, talk to UX designers, and the idea is to basically help product people along the many difficulties they'll face in their product journeys. So I'm really excited to have you here because I several months ago stumbled across the internet. I think it was a Hamilton Spectator article on you, and just fell in love with your story. So I've been chasing you, as you know, for a few months here to get you on the podcast. So thanks for being here. Before we get too far in, Matt, we're in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada here, and we're in the McMaster Innovation Park. So why don't we start with you just giving an introduction of yourself and what you're doing here and what your company's all about.
Yeah, great. First of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's an honor. So like you said, my name is Matthew Sheridan, CEO and founder of Nix Color Sensor. We're here in Hamilton, at the Innovation Park. So the Innovation Park is actually connected to McMaster University. It's a place for, of course, innovation. A lot of it is automotive and materials based because there is a huge connection between McMaster University and the automotive sector. Mm-hmm. But in addition to that, there's a lot of space for startup companies. There's mentorship, there's advice, there's government grants as well. So in the particular building we're in today, there's the Innovation Factory, which is what we call here one of the regional innovation centers. I like to explain them sort of as a librarian type system where you go to them. They may not necessarily have the resources themselves, but they'll get it for you. So they'll connect you to people. They'll help you basically with any problem you might have. So they'll help anyone from a barber or a restaurant owner all the way up to a software company, hardware company, all across the board. And they're completely a nonprofit association, so they've helped us a ton every single day, basically, that we've ever existed. There's also the Forge, which is a innovation sort of incubation center. Mm-hmm. So there's one here in the building. There's 10 of the hottest startups sort of in Hamilton working there day and night on their projects. They work there completely rent-free. Mm-hmm. And they have access to mentorship, classes, courses, basically anything they need. And that project's been so successful that they've actually expanded to a downtown location that has another 10 businesses as well. Amazing. So there's a lot happening in the building. It's a really interesting space. We took the tour earlier today. Yeah. And you noticed that it's an old Westinghouse factory. Mm-hmm. So it's got some sort of charm to it as well, which is kind of nice. And it has that sort of aura of manufacturing and people actually getting things done, which is nice. So
yeah, excellent, and it's an interesting contrast too, because I don't know a lot about the history of Hamilton, but I know in previous generations, it's been more of a like resources. Not necessarily mining, but
steel.
Steel manufacturing.
Yeah, so historically, Hamilton is known as the steel town.
Right.
So
Hamilton Steelers.
Yeah, the steel sort of town mentality is still around. the average person is very hands-on. I'd find in Hamilton, it's a blue collar city, but the steel industry itself is almost gone. So Hamilton had a very sort of bad couple decades, and now they're coming out of that, totally transitioning to this more health sciences, high-tech industries. We have the university, we have the college. It's the resurgence is huge. There's a lot of art as well. It's a very creative city, a lot of music, a lot of fine art. So you kind of see these companies popping up around that sort of concept as well. And it's a good place to start a business because it has access to resources in Toronto and Waterloo. It's close to the U.S. border. But you don't have the drastically inflated costs of some of those places. And you can still actually go out and find a quality engineer and hire them. They haven't been sucked away to some other city yet. So it's a really great place to run a business.
Yeah, and just because I know we've got international listeners of this podcast, Finland, all over Europe, you name it, and just to give people a sense. So Hamilton is basically southwest of Toronto, about an hour's drive. Would that be fair to say?
It is.
Okay, cool. So that's great, Matt. So now let's talk about your story, and I want you to start with when you were in university, what you were studying, and then kind of bring us up step by step to where you are today. Because I like I said, I find it a fascinating story. So
yeah, sure. So I guess if we go back a little bit further, even,
sure.
I've always been a hands-on learner, hands-on type person. Throughout high school, I always had a lab in my parents' house. I had, the bench top supplies, all the electronic supplies, woodworking, things like that. And that's really what interested me. I was okay in academics. I mean, it wasn't too bad for me in high school, but really the hands-on stuff was what was interesting. So I ended up going into engineering, and at Mac here, McMaster University, which is Hamilton's university, they have a unique sort of program. Other schools have it, but it's not across the board. But when you go into engineering, you actually take a general engineering first year. And I really wanted to do that because at that point in time, I didn't really want to sort of narrow myself down to what I'll do for the rest of my life. So that was really great. You take chemical engineering, electrical, civil engineering, everything across the board. So you do get a very broad education, and then you pick what stream you want to go into. So at that stage, I thought, actually electronics that's going to be my passion. That's something I want to continue to work on. So they have a new program called mechatronics engineering. So a lot of people don't know what that is and never even heard that word before. It's basically the intersection between hardware, software, and a little bit of mechanical engineering as well. So I like to explain it sort of as the Tony Stark style Iron Man, that sort of stuff, robotics, self-driving cars, things like that. That's really what mechatronics is.
Nice.
So I went into that program, and I also added on a business degree at the same time. So they call that a management degree in engineering, but you take it with the commerce students. So 5-year program, but unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I didn't go to class that often because once again, sort of the hands-on mentality came out, and I ended up spending a lot of time at different clubs on campus. One of the biggest ones for me was the McMaster Solar Car project. So I was on that team for 4 years during school, and I worked on it after school as well. But what we basically did was build a completely solar-powered car from scratch.
Amazing.
So it did take a very long time, but it was a really, really good experience because it directly correlates to sort of what we'll be talking about later, which is the business aspect of it. We had a team of around 40 people. They weren't just engineers. We had business students, we had humanities students. The whole team had to work together. And they're not just electrical engineers. We had the mechanical guys. We had composite guys. All these people. So to be able to manage those people, we had a significant budget, around $300,000 budget. But in the grand scheme of Solar Car, that's quite cheap. So then you have to figure out, how do you use this budget? How do you build this NASA grade piece of equipment in a room in the basement of the engineering building with no windows. So you get really creative in problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big sort of takeaway as well, as being able to solve these problems. So through that solar car mentality, I guess, we learned all those skills. And actually, I'd say that's probably the biggest thing I learned throughout university in general was that sort of management style, the problem solving, and then also you have the academic skills from the program. How do you actually build these things or program it? And then after I graduated, I stuck around Hamilton for a little bit, and I was doing contract work for a designer. Basically, the premise of their business was they would develop products with inventors around the world, and they would get Chinese engineers to actually work out the details, and then they would go direct to manufacturing. So it kind of streamlined the whole process. The problem with it was, though, that there was a lot of projects they couldn't solve, and they were past the deadline. They would come to me already angry. So I would have to step in sort of as the Canadian engineer to solve the unsolvable tasks, which was really fun at the time. It was stressful because you're already past the deadline when you start. But that was a really interesting job. And while I was working on that, we actually were here in the building taking courses at the Innovation Factory, which we talked about before. Those courses were great. A lot of business classes, a lot of, how do you hone your value proposition, a lot of good networking opportunities as well. And that's really sort of where the idea for the current business started, was in that sort of space. I guess if we want to get into that now, we can start with that. Sure. So summary, I guess, is school, hands-on experience. Out of school, problem solving. That's what I really like to do. But my mom is an interior designer, and she lugs around these tote bags of fan decks. So you have international viewers. So it might not be the same everywhere, but everyone, I think, is familiar with the concept of a piece of paper with a color on it. And that's basically universal in how people measure color. And I'm doing air quotes when I say measure color, because you're really just comparing, but that's a side thing. But so people use these paper swatch books, and they're completely proprietary. They're completely made up, basically. They're not even elegant like a periodic table. It's just random names with random colors, and they're tied to a particular brand. So I saw my mom walking around with these things, and it's literally a tote bag with a zipper and a strap. It's, costs $200 to buy the set. And she would talk on the phone with her friends in the States and in Europe all the time, and try to explain the colors over the phone. And then also, they wouldn't have the same brand there. So even if she could explain it, you can't transfer to you can't transfer from PPG to Valspar to whatever it might be. So I just thought that didn't make any sense. It's the 21st century. How are we still measuring color with these like little pieces of paper? So I had that as the seed of an idea. And at the time I had a lot of ideas. So I wouldn't say it was really that at the front of my mind, really, even at that time, but it was just there. And I was taking these classes at Innovation Factory, sitting around a big table, sort of networking event. And we had the goal was to go around the table and say, what is your business? What is the difficulty that you're having? And how can you solve that problem? And so we're going around the table, and there's a woman next to me, and she says that she runs a business that makes custom makeup for burn victims at the hospital here. And she does it completely by eye. She mixes these pigments and airbrushes them on their skin. And then the problem she was having is that she can't expand her business because she has 10 years of experience in this manual color method. So the next person would have to have that. That's very slow growth at that rate, right? So she word for word says she's looking for a low-cost portable color sensor. And then it comes to me and I say, well, I'm working on this idea where I'm trying to make a low-cost portable color sensor, but I don't have any customers.
What's the chance, right?
Right? So it was kind of fate. That was a kick in the butt to get me going. And she was actually quoted by one of our competitors $15,000 for one unit.
Wow.
And at the time, I was super naive, right? I don't know the market at this stage. That didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. How can it cost $15,000 to measure the color of something? So almost as a joke, I said I could start a whole business for $15,000 and catch up. So I did start the business that way. And I put $15,000 in, and actually the local government put another $15,000 in through a program I actually got through Innovation Factory, which is great. So that set us off on the path of prototyping and market validation. Of course, I was way too cocky, and it was a really, really difficult problem. So I couldn't end up solving it for the $15,000, but it got me going at least. And then from there, I guess we hired a summer student. So we were prototyping, using that sort of solar car mentality again of the scrappiness, how do you just get something done? We built a lab out of my apartment in downtown Hamilton. It's a 100-year-old wooden building. And we had an extra bedroom, 10-foot by 10-foot room. And we built a full production lab in there with 3D printers, CNC, all the electronics tools. We fit 2 guys in there, and we just worked for the whole summer. The neighbors hated us because we would run the CNC at 2 a.m, and they would think there was robots fighting upstairs or something like that. But
and just to clarify for folks that might not know what a CNC is, that's like the milling. That's the milling.
Yeah, computerized router. So if you can picture you running a drill attached to a robot at 2 a.m.
Okay, good.
Doesn't make very nice sounds. So, but it kind of that's really, I guess you're going to see the sort of the theme is how do you just get something done quickly and efficiently? Because some companies, they'll spend millions of dollars on this sort of thing, but we want to see, is it possible first before we get too deep into it? And we did end up proving it was possible, but it was just way more difficult than we ever could imagine. But we had some really interesting prototypes from that stage. This was sort of around the beginning of 3D printing, so it was difficult to do it at home to that level of accuracy. But we would actually take prints to the university. And it kind of reminds me of back in the day when you had to share computer time with someone at the university at night. But we would go at nighttime, pay the guy who works the machine shop with a 6-pack of beer, and we'd put our prototypes inside of other people's prototypes in the gaps. So it wouldn't take any extra time or money for him. It just sort of was part of the process. And that's how we built some of those original prototypes. We made a few actually that were upside down shot glasses, so to use as like an aperture for the scanner. So we had a dollar store, $1 shot glass, and put the electronics on the inside of that, which is kind of interesting as well. But we got far enough along with that that we said to ourselves, you know what, we're going to try to raise money on Kickstarter. And I'm not sure if everyone knows what Kickstarter is because it's not that popular around the whole world, but it's a system online for you to basically ask the general public for funds to work on a project. So it doesn't have to be a business. It could be a charity. It could be just a personal project. But in our case, what we said to just random people in the world, if we could build this, would you buy it? And would you pay right now? Which is totally a different model for doing something like this, right? You're getting the customers to pay before it even exists. And the benefit of that for us, though, was really twofold. One is, well, we needed the money. How do you build the thing, right? But the other thing was that we didn't really 100% know if the public wanted this. So that's a classic engineering failure is, work in the basement for 10 years and then come out of a hole in the ground and then, no one wants it. You didn't ask. So this way you asked the whole world. We ended up raising twice the amount of money that we asked for, which was great, in 30 days. And we're the first people in Canada to actually run a Kickstarter campaign officially. So that was really the big boost for us moving forward. So that allowed us to take those original, prototypes and really take it to the next level. And that's how we ended up releasing the first version of our color sensing product.
Yeah, good. And then what was the uptake on the first version? Like don't give away any secrets here or anything, but for example, was it enough for you to kind of, to use the same term, kickstart your business or bootstrap your business, or was it still a fairly tepid reception? Or
so I guess when we talk, I think I should maybe introduce the product a little bit just to give some context to this. But
good. Yeah.
So the problem that we sort of talked about before is that color is quote unquote measured by these paper swatches. And the problem with that is that swatch books you're using a human eye. So it's subjective. It's affected by the ambient light in the room. It's affected by weird shadows, gloss, texture, all these things that you might have. Not to mention that 8% of men are colorblind in the first place in some way, shape, or form. So it's kind of a losing battle with those. But even if you could get it right, it's still tied to one proprietary system.
Right.
So what we wanted to do is digitize this, but you can't do it with software. So a lot of people would ask me, why don't you just make an app?
Yeah.
The problem with that is you still can't control the lighting. So you could calibrate the camera on the phone, but if I turn off the lights in the room, for example, well, what color is everything? Well, now it's black, right? So and you have to take out the light source in the room. So what we built is basically sort of a stethoscope style item that you touch to an object. It blocks out the ambient light, provides its own calibrated light source inside. Then we measure the reflected light. So it's very, very, very precise. We can achieve accuracy levels that are much higher than that of the human eye because it can't be tricked.
Today's episode was brought to you by Eigenworks. Most companies don't know why they lose deals, and few know why they win. Eigenworks can tell you why. With the buyer as hero approach, Eigenworks gets deep insight into the reasons organizations make buying decisions. The product, promotion, and sales insights provide Eigenworks clients with a significant competitive position in their marketplaces.
So basically, the Kickstarter project was to fund the first version of this. And because it's not software, it's hardware, it's expensive. And a lot of people, at least in our area here at the time, had no idea that anyone would ever really attempt to do this. It was mostly the startup sort of scene here is mostly software,
right?
Because it's easier to bootstrap and it's easier to scale. Hardware is hard. Yeah. So we raised the money, and it was enough to get it going, but it definitely wasn't enough really to skyrocket the business. But sort of back to the reason why you do Kickstarter, you're going to get the money, but you get the market validation. Right. So the market validation was enough for me to go out and raise some capital through angel investors in the area because they're a lot more comfortable, obviously, than it just being an idea. So, 1,000 people in the world said it was a good idea. It's a lot different than if I just said it was a good idea, right? So that was the real way that we really took it to the next level. Okay. But the interesting part is that we're still running it out of the apartment at this time. So we ended up, we raised a significant sum of money still running out of the apartment. And we have to actually deliver this product now. So we got the molds made, the PCBs made, everything, and we shipped the components to Hamilton. And we did all the assembly and calibration here. So there's a lot of interesting videos and photos of us having 6 or 7 guys in the living room of the apartment putting everything together manually and shipping stuff out around the world from the living room, which is kind of interesting. But it's literally like one of those garage startup stories, but even worse because it's just a living room. But so after that, I guess we ended up getting feedback from these people. So it's interesting when you're a small company because you can do things that large companies can't. So we went and we actually talked to every single person we sent a unit to from the first batch, and we said, what are you using this for? Because it was very diverse. And what do you want to see changed? What features do you want to see? And we really sort of, you can't have everything in there, right? It's just a perpetual, sort of task. But we put in what I would say 90% of the functionality that people would want. And then that's when we went to our version 2. So we took everything we learned from that and we went to what we have now, which is called the Nix Pro color sensor. And the device we have now is just, miles ahead of the first one. It's much more accurate. The battery life is insane, like 6 months on a single charge. So we really took it to the next level. Yeah, that's awesome. And then I'm sure a lot of the product people listening are thinking,
well, there's got to be a ton of applications for color sensors. So when you talk about market validation, did you have to go through a process of saying we're going to focus at least at a certain point in time on certain markets, or are you saying no, or were you thinking no, we're going to try to make the thing as general as possible so that people can imagine their own uses for it? If you understand the question.
Yeah, no, I definitely do. So that's amazing advice, I think, to anyone, is to focus on a particular market vertical, because then you can put your energy, 100% energy and efficiency into that market vertical.
Yep.
And we, in theory, tried to do that. So the original Kickstarter was based around designers, so interior and graphic designers. Because in my mind at the time, it made perfect sense. An interior designer uses paint, and paint is colorful, and graphic designers are working in color. Like, that's an obvious fit. But what was interesting was that when we went to go talk to the people who actually purchased, the majority of the people who purchased had nothing to do with that. So we tried to keep it focused, but it was our customers could see all these other uses, and we couldn't stop them, obviously. So it kind of just went all over the place. Like, I'm really saying all over the place. Like, we sold units to 30 different countries in probably 100 different uses. It was just really crazy. So actually, another sort of side story to that was that one of the big first deals we ever made with like a larger corporation instead of an individual designer was a company based in Switzerland for the scanning of egg yolks, salmon, and chicken skin. And that was a really weird thing. So they actually found us through the Kickstarter campaign, through Mexico, then to Amsterdam, where they're based, then to Switzerland, and then somehow contacted me, and I ended up actually being in Amsterdam at the time. We just met at the airport. We did the deal in the airport, but it shows you how kind of crazy the internet is, and Kickstarter and all these things, where it can go full, like literally around the world and come back to you. But never in a million years would I thought that egg yolks is going to be an industry. But that's really, I think, what keeps me going now, is that those things come up every single day, and the problem solving is just incredible. And I think that's a lot of the value that we provide as a team, is that we're flexible and we kind of can work around these incredibly difficult problems. The egg one, for example, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world patented this original system in the 70s, and they haven't updated it since then because they cannot figure out really how to do it. So we were kind of the first people in the world to actually come up with a solution that made sense and was cost effective. So it's quite interesting. But since then, we are working in automotive, plastics, just manufacturing in general. All over the place on food and agriculture. So a lot of meats. So there's a salmon, chicken skin, but we do like pork, beef, avocados, crazy things like that all over the place. And honestly, we get a person calling us every day with another weird example. We had someone phone, I think it was last week, from a nuclear reactor panicking, which was a scary call. But they actually got a reel of cable for the nuclear reactor, and it has to be a specific color, but it was slightly off. And then, and then you get into this whole thing again saying, like, why does it matter? But it has to meet the spec. That's just how it is. And it's insanely expensive to make. And if it's off, it's an insanely expensive mistake for everyone. So they need a way to figure out, objectively, what is the color of this cabling. So it's never, once again, in a million years would have thought that we would use, one of our color sensors in a nuclear reactor. But I guess when it comes down to it, every physical thing in the world, by definition, has a color. And if you're in the business of manufacturing anything, at some point, you do have to do a color quality control check. And a lot of the times it's just by eye, or it's by some, instrument that's tens of thousands of dollars. But until we came around, there's nothing sort of in that range where a regular person on the assembly line could use it. So that's kind of where we're trying to play.
Yeah, and it's interesting just what you're saying there, Matt, because you're right. I've had it certainly pounded into my head, and you hear it all the time. Pick a niche, and somebody says, for example, that they're going to focus on plumbers, and the marketing guru will say that's still too general, right? You have to focus on toilet plumbers, that focus on toilets. The story that you're telling here is interesting. You had an initial focus, which was around the design and the graphic arts, but then also you listen to your market as well, and you're kind of breaking a fundamental rule there by going all over the place. But obviously you're doing it because it's working for you.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and so my investors on my board might hear this, and they're probably going to tell me to stay focused. But it's interesting because there's a difference, I think, between what your marketing team is doing and what the guys answering the phone are doing. Yeah. So for our example, we're really lucky that we didn't target those people. They just found us somehow, which is amazing, and they came to us. So that's sort of it's not as sort of scatterbrained as it really seems. But what we've noticed, though, is that the industries themselves are obviously drastically different. Like cosmetics and meat is different, but the problems are the same. Right. And that's where we're trying to focus. Right. So we're trying to focus on solving the problem of color measurement in a way that is semi sort of generic. And my analogy for that sometimes is we want to be the tape measure for color. So contractors, or you're building a house, you would never take out a 2x4 to the parking lot, get all your friends together, stare at it for 10 minutes, and then just randomly cut. Yeah. You just take out the tape measure and you know exactly how long it is, right? And that's a $10 tool, and it makes their job infinitely easier. Yep. But that doesn't exist in color. People literally stop full assembly lines, take a swatch of fabric from the assembly line to the parking lot, and just stare at it until they think that it's right. That's how it works. Yeah. And that's the same thing with the meat. In packing facilities here in Canada, there's a guy who sits in a chair who looks at the meat when it goes by, and they grade it based on color. But it's just a guy sitting in the chair. Yeah. So
first problem there is it's a guy. You could probably tell a woman might have a higher likelihood of having a broader range of color perception.
My girlfriend would have something to say about that. Sure. It wouldn't coordinate with anything, that's for sure. It's interesting that it's sort of a universal truth that most industries measure color by eye or using these swatch books, which is still by eye. So we're trying to sort of access that in a general way without really locking our product down so people can figure out their own uses for it. So we do have a flexible API, which is a application program interface for people to write code to connect to our device as well. Right. So our off-the-shelf device, which we sell on our website, it's fairly general, right? It's made for those 90% of the people. But there's very niche uses where you can buy the product and you can write your own code. You can build something specifically for measuring the color of tulip bulbs or something like that. And that's I think a huge thing for us is we want to make sure that we don't slow down or impede the development of our customers.
Yeah, so that's part of what I wanted to chat with you about, Matt, because I'll certainly put online on the link to this pictures of the device, because we'll just have to describe it because this is an audio podcast. But the current Color Pro version that I purchased and fell in love with, it basically is kind of about the size of an egg, but it's shaped like a diamond. So if you imagine, one of those cartoon diamond rings, that I guess you'd have to be the Jolly Green Giant for it to be to scale, but it's basically shaped like that. So have you ever had anybody come to you and say, Matt, we want to take your technology, but we're thinking of a different form factor, and we want to basically, build the physical aspect of it ourselves, but use your intellectual property and use your color sensing capabilities, or are most of your customers using that current, I'll call it diamond form factor?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think maybe if we go back a little bit, the way that the whole business is set up from our standpoint is to be flexible. Our competitors are not flexible. They're these massive behemoths. They sell these products that are $10,000 and there's no customization. It's just, you get this, you get the software, and that's it. You're done. You can spend $1 million if you want customization, then maybe we'll talk about it. But for our product, we designed it from the ground up. So when you say, could you get a different enclosure, we thought of that before the product was even made. So it is made in a modular way. Mm-hmm. You can take the PCB out and implant it into something else quite easily. Mm-hmm. So if you do want a different shape or different color plastic or, anything, we can do that. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge plus. But we go all the way down to, so you can buy the off-the-shelf product. Mm-hmm. 90%, 99% of the people probably, that's fine. Even in very large quantities, that it's fine for them. But one step above that, we actually have a white label version where the lid on the standard product has our Nix logo engraved in it. But we have a flat one where we actually can get anyone's logo on there. So if you're like a huge paint company or a cosmetics company, we'll get your logo silk screened on there. The product looks like it's yours now. We can, change the packaging, things like that. That covers a lot of our customers as well. And then we'll go to that. The next step would be that sort of fully custom on the hardware. But in parallel to that, we have the software. And that's another benefit too, is that our device actually has no buttons. It's just purely the color sensing hardware. Try to keep it as simple and low cost as possible, while still maintaining that accuracy. But because we built it like that, if you want to add a feature, a lot of that's just in software. So we'll do the custom applications. We'll use that API that I mentioned before to develop that. And we can crank out a production quality app with that API in a week or two. It has your company's logo on it. It has the exact features you want, nothing else, and that covers a lot of check boxes as well for these guys.
No, that's great. And it's one of the things that attracted me to the device. I'm not an Apple guy, but I saw that Apple sensibility of. I think it's something if, for example, if Steve Jobs were still around, that he'd have a grin when he saw the fact that like you say, there's no buttons. It's all there. The other thing that I like is one of the first questions one of my colleagues asked when I showed it to them is, okay, well, how do I calibrate this? So can you talk a little bit about the fact that I don't need to, as the user, ever recalibrate this or worry about it going out of calibration?
Yeah. So that's another, that I guess we changed that based on the feedback from the first product. So typically in this industry, in electronics in general, the batch to batch things are drastically different. So you can attempt to make all your devices exactly the same, but it is very difficult. And you'll see this in an extreme way on TVs or monitors. They're all the same monitor, but they don't look the same. The panels are different. They might try to sort them into sort of premium ones and B-level ones, but they're still different. Like you can see. So you kind of have this losing battle. So in the color sensing industry, though, basically what our competitors do is they'll make 100,000 units in China in a huge batch. They'll ship it over. They'll assume that all the 100,000 units sort of had the same batch of components inside. But then there's still this variation. So they'll send you a white card with your product, and you scan the white card, and then the white card sort of like tweaks the last little bit of the calibration. The problem with that, though, is that you're not doing a true calibration. You're just doing this little tweak at the end. And that now the white card is the weak link in the chain. So sometimes it's literally just a white piece of paper, which is not really that great, because if you touch it, it has a smudge or something. Now your whole calibration's off. Or if it fades or you lose it. So it's kind of a pain. We did this, so in the first version, we had a white plastic card you'd calibrate from. We just didn't really like the levels of accuracy we were getting. So in the current version, the Nix Pro color sensor, we actually hand calibrate every single unit in our facility here in Hamilton. So it's kind of rare for a product even to be made anywhere in Canada, but we do the full assembly here and the calibration, and then we do all the quality control checks, and then we put it into the packaging. So we have systems that are done by hand for particular ones, and we have a robot that's basically doing the same thing in an automated fashion. It will scan colored tiles, do the calibration automatically, and all the color quality control steps. So we'll actually program that calibration individually for that unit into the unit itself. So like you were saying, you don't have to have this card and you don't have to recalibrate. And of course, there can be drift over time, but to reduce that, we have a very simple mechanism. There's no moving parts, so there's nothing to wear out. And all the optical components are just basically, it's not that fancy of an engineering technique. It's just don't skimp on the components, right? So we use the highest quality electronics we possibly can get in the world, and that's how we achieve, this crazy level of stability that we have.
So just one more question on the current product, and then we'll get back to the business. So there is an ability, I think it's like a pinhole reset button in the current product. So what does that do? I haven't tried to do that on mine, but what does that do if I stick a pin in there? And
so because there's no buttons, it's possible that you can mess up your unit if you do something weird with it, especially if you're using the API and you access some command that doesn't make any sense. So the reset just causes it to do a full cycle of the firmware. It's like
doing a battery pull on your cell phone.
Exactly, yeah. So the interesting part about the product is that because there's no buttons, a lot of people say, how do I turn it on? Well, it's actually on all the time, forever. But it uses Bluetooth Low Energy, which you'll see a lot of the times in modern phones, but it's more prevalent, I guess, in like fitness bands and things like that. It's extremely low power. We were some of the first people really in the world to use this. We had support for Bluetooth Low Energy before Fitbit did, for example. So it was difficult to get that implemented in the device, but we have, for any of the technical people listening to this, it goes down to the microamp range when it's sitting in your desk. So that's how we get to the level of 6 months of battery life on a single charge, and then it just has a micro USB port, and you charge again.
Today's podcast was brought to you by Eigenworks. Eigenworks specializes in win-loss analysis and customer development as a service. Get candid feedback to improve your sales approach, uncover competitive intelligence, and help you pivot as needed. Yeah, exactly. So let's get back to the business here then, Matt. So you were just discussing with me that you're growing like gangbusters. So talk to me now as a kind of a successful entrepreneur. You've now got that problem that most people would love to have, which is, demand is probably exceeding your capacity to deliver. So talk a bit about what's happening in terms of growth and how you envision that happening, with your business.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think we have to be careful not to grow too quickly. I think you can get into a lot of trouble in that way, because the real value that our company has is in the problem solving and the creativity and the speed. So if you just start growing for the sake of growing and you turn into the behemoth sort of competitor that we're working against, then you don't want to do that. And you have to strategically grow so you still have those values like embedded in the company. That being said, we are growing quite rapidly right now. We do also try to invest in, I guess, processes and techniques in the business that make it so that we can get away with having less people as well. So like the calibration, for example, we did have a government grant to build this calibration robot system that greatly increases the efficiency. So we don't have to resort to something like building these out of China. So that's a big thing for us as well. So our efficiency per person is actually ridiculously high right now, which is great. So we have to make sure that those two things stay in lockstep, really, increase those efficiency boosts with increasing the personnel count at the same time. I think that's going to be key to our success moving forward.
And is there anything, and again, don't give away any secrets here, obviously, but is there any market direction, driving the growth? In other words, are you starting to because a typical, for example, growth would be to say, okay, I started out with one product, Apple Computer is a good example, and then I divide into, for example, 3 markets, and I say, okay, now I'm going to do 3 different products, fundamentally the same technology, but I'm going to customize them for three different markets. is that the kind of growth, or is it more, no, let's stick fundamentally with, like you say, being this tape measure for color, and it's more just about increasing our capacity, if I can ask it that way?
Yeah, I think for us, I don't know if it's black and white. It might be a combination of it. And
Sure.
we almost sort of look at it internally as like there's the off-the-shelf product as 50% of the business, and the other 50% is this sort of customization or even the white label part.
Yeah.
So that customization is growing just rapidly. We have, for example, a lot of large paint companies coming on board. So that's a big source of growth for us. So we'll build custom units with their logo on top, and that's going to eventually go into these paint retail stores for customers to use and the associates to use in the store. That's definitely where we're going to see a ton of growth in the next year. And then on the sort of the off the shelf side, that's when we work on getting our distribution worldwide. We're on Amazon right now, which really gets us to most parts of the world. But signing up key partners for that is going to be a big thing moving forward, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Good. That's good. Okay. Well, we'll make sure to include lots of links because it's a really great story. But let's move on to a second topic here, Matt. I wanted you to talk a little bit about in more detail. You introduced it earlier, but about this innovation park that we're in here, because I think there's a blueprint here that probably is really valuable for people to think about. And Hamilton's probably not the only town doing this. I'm sure they're around the world. But talk about this McMaster Innovation Park and what value it brings and how people find it and how critical it's been to you guys. Like, just talk a little bit about the innovation park and talk a little bit more about the surroundings and what it's like to work here as well, because I think that's a fascinating part of your story as well.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's also a key part of the success we've had so far, for sure. We've been offered actually to move to Silicon Valley, to New York, to Boston, all those places.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, we get asked that quite a lot actually by VCs down south, and even to Waterloo here in Canada, which is sort of our Silicon Valley North. But we do like Hamilton specifically because it has this sort of hands-on mentality. There's no hype to it, and that was not necessarily on purpose. It was because that's just how Hamilton is. Like, it's not through the period of the steel mills sort of collapsing, it wasn't fortunate enough to have any hype. So that's just ingrained in people's minds. They're heads down, work type people. That really helps us, I think, because you do have to stay focused. You can't get sucked into all this sort of stuff. But at the same time, you can't work completely in isolation. So I think this this innovation park is a very good middle ground where you have every single resource that every single one of these other places has, but you have less distraction. And I guess they appreciate the fact that, you can't necessarily go to all these networking events and things like that. You have to work on your project, right? So particularly at this innovation park, we have the innovation factory, as I was saying before, which is like the librarians of resources. We use those guys every day. Like, they're absolutely incredible. And there's OCE, which is one of the government grant sort of associations here in Canada as well. Just to get advice from them is amazing. We took a little tour of the building earlier today, and there's a lot of facilities here. We have a gym in the basement, which is nice. Try to stay sane a little bit. The whole building used to be this Westinghouse factory, and it has a nice concrete floors. It has an atrium in the middle that goes all the way up to the a glass roof, so you get nice lighting. Once again, keeps us sane. A lot of the theme is that you're trying to stay sane if you're working 16-hour days or something like that. So that's great, but even today, in the atrium, they're having some sort of symposium on advanced manufacturing and connections to the school. So you do have these opportunities to network and to connect with industry, connect with the academic world as well. So I think that's a big kind of key. It is becoming this sort of hub here in Hamilton for sure.
Yeah. And you were mentioning that because I think the structure of it's interesting. So you're saying it's a not-for-profit. Do you have an idea of how it gets funded? Because it's a great building. There's power on right now.
So the building itself is for profit.
Okay.
So the building is basically like every other building, but it happens that inside of the building is this innovation factory, and it is confusing because they basically almost have the same name. So there's the Innovation Park, which is the overall area, but Innovation Factory is within it. So Innovation Factory is not for profit. Okay. So they're funded though by government grants and also some of the private organizations around us right here. Right. So like the bank, like our local bank would be one of their one of their sponsors, and they do fundraising activities as well. But they, like Innovation Factory, for example, runs everything from a very small breakfast meeting for 15 people to talk about their value proposition, all the way up to something they called Lion's Lair, which is sort of a take on the Shark Tank, Dragon's Den type thing, where it's sort of a pitch competition, but it's huge now. It fills a whole banquet hall. There's, I think, around $150,000 worth of prizes, and people do real deals there. It's quite amazing, and for the people who don't win, it's just as valuable because all the way up to this actual sort of banquet at the end of the year, they're trained, they're working on their business plan. They have these mentors that they're attached to, so they're all polished up, ready to go at the end of this thing. So maybe they don't win the competition, but they're ready to go to, any investor, or even if they don't, their business is going to be a lot more sustainable and efficient because it went through this whole process. So you definitely see how they can help the community as a whole drastically. And we kind of have these sort of like out of body experiences sometimes in the office where we'll have like a really, really, really good day and everyone's hyped up, high-fiving in the office. But then someone will kind of come down from it a bit and say, sometimes we have no idea what we're doing. Good thing we had that other guy, you know what I mean? Yeah. So like a perfect example of that was at sort of the beginning stages of when we're, going out there trying to sign on these corporate clients. As a younger sort of group of people, how do you even do that? How do you contact a company that has 70,000 employees and work your way through their systems and all that? Like, I don't even know how, at that stage we had no idea how that contract would look even. So the Innovation Factory asked me, what do you need to move forward? And I said, we need help with sales. So they actually went out and they hired a sales guy from Microsoft to come in one day a week. So we don't pay anything. He was just, our sales mentor. And he kind of attached to our team, and we see him still, he still comes out to check up on us just to make sure everything's moving smoothly. And those are things that are amazing as a startup, because how can you can't afford to go out and hire someone full time, an experienced salesperson. So you can share the person with other people, which is great. And as we learn, we try to give back to the other people in the area too. Like even basic things, we went out and we bought promotional sunglasses for some trade show we went to, and we got a really good deal. But, so some other group is going to use the same supplier, and you share these, ideas, talk about advice you got from your lawyer, all these things that in isolation would be very, very difficult. And I think that's really, I guess, the theme of the whole Innovation Park. The buildings itself is it's a place for people to come together and, help each other and build this sort of ecosystem, because we're not in competition with each other. We're in competition with the rest of the world as a team, right? As a country, as a city, everything, right? You don't, you want to win personally, but you want to make sure sort of everyone comes up with you. So.
Yeah, that's great. Listen, I want to respect your time, Matt. So the next question I wanted to ask you is were there any other options that you considered, when you were still in school? For example, I'm a lot older than you, but the model when I was going through school was you go through school, you get an education, you get a job, you get a mortgage, you get a dog, you get a wife and kids. And was there ever a decision process in your mind to say job versus entrepreneur? Or like you say, did you just know basically when you were a teenager or even younger that this was always going to be your path?
Yeah, in hindsight, it's a little bit difficult to, figure out what your mentality was. But I do definitely remember disliking a lot of jobs that I had. And I knew, I had the sort of entrepreneurial spirit at that time, if you want to say it. I used to do everything from, selling polo shirts out of my dorm room or something like that. So I used to really like the concept of being in control of your own sort of destiny. And not necessarily even from a financial perspective, but just the perspective of saying to yourself at night, everything I succeeded at was because I did it, and everything I failed at was because I did it. And then you can't blame anyone else. I kind of like that. So that combined with the problem solving sort of aspect and the hands-on nature, that's, I think, why it ended up being sort of a technical project I ended up working on too. Because the other sort of half of me is on the finance side, and I was interested in financial services and things like that. So I could have gone that route, but I thought the problem solving, that technical aspect was really what would draw me there. But I find it kind of funny that you bring up the sort of the house and the dog and that sort of thing, because I specifically remember saying that to friends when we started the business. It might be crazy, but if you're going to do it, you better do it now before you have the house and the kid and the dog and the wife and stuff, because it's easier to do it now than it is, later in life, to come out of a job, a secure job, and go into this sort of field.
Yeah, and there seems to be, from what I hear talking to people, Matt, there seems to be two times to do it. You can either do it right out of the gate, which is what you're doing, or you can do it at my age once, some of your obligations start to decrease, so to speak. But to do it in the middle, it would be very difficult, very difficult.
And people do it. I mean, people are crazy that do it. But
exactly. So that's good. So let's move to close here, Matt. And I'm hoping, that we can maybe have another chat again in the future and maybe check in with you. But want to respect your time. So last question I always ask all my guests is, and I ask it one of two ways. You're a younger guy earlier in your journey, so I'll ask it this way. When you look forward and project to, let's say, the 10, 15, 20-year-older Matt Sheridan and, think about who you want that person to be, what you want that person to have accomplished. What are some of the goals or visions for yourself and your business life that you have in mind there?
Yeah, wow, really good, elaborate question. It's very deep, but I guess it
could be just to get up tomorrow and still be able to keep doing what I'm doing. That's fine.
One day at a time.
Yeah.
But no, well, there's that for sure. I'd love to keep doing if I could just repeat, yesterday over and over again, I'd be totally fine with that.
Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
For the next 15 years.
It's fun running a business like this, and it's a roller coaster too, which is great. But I think moving forward, what I'd really like to see is, I guess, growing our business to the size where it is fully, sustainable. It would be something that other people in the world, like non-entrepreneurs, would say is like a full, real business, right? Like, you get to 50, 100 employees, whatever. But that's arbitrary. But really, I think what would be interesting is that you have the freedom to continue to work on some crazy R&D projects and, explore this sort of world of sensors and color sensing in general. But then around that business, grow with everyone else here. I think that's what I'd really like to see, is like this whole area just totally come up to a whole other level. And you see that happening now in Hamilton for sure. I've been in Hamilton probably for almost maybe 8 or 9 years now, and it's drastically changing. I think in 15 years from now, you will see all these companies sort of build up a totally different economy. And it's kind of interesting because we see it happening right around us, and it's exciting because we always say, like, there's a lot of other cities like Toronto or New York City or something where imagine you could go back in time and you could be there before it was big, if you were along for that journey. And we sort of say that, like, we're lucky that we're kind of at that stage for Hamilton. So I think in 15 years, we're going to We're going to be at, totally different economy and everything. It'll be amazing to be along for that ride.
Yeah, and as you were talking there, what I was thinking of, Matt, one of the important guys from Silicon Valley area, Andy Grove, recently passed away, and I remember, one of the things I admired about him is obviously he was pivotal in Intel and getting that going, but I liked that he always stayed close. For example, he was a teacher at whatever school he came from out in the valley there, and he seemed to have that same sense of community that you're talking about, which is it's good to see something grow. And
our whole team is like that, which is amazing. Like they're in it for the long run. They're in it for the ride. So
that's great. Well, listen, let's leave it there. We're running short on time here. So if somebody's listening to this podcast, Matt, and they've got a question about something you said, or they're intrigued and want to learn more, please give us the full specs that you're comfortable with on Nix Sensor Limited and how people can get a hold of that and perhaps, investigate buying the product if they want, but also share any contact information for yourself. If somebody's, like we were saying, maybe somebody's where you were at, kind of before they sat down beside that lady with the cosmetic problem, and maybe they're just stuck and they're saying, gee, this Matt guy sounds like somebody who could really help me, get to my next step. Any contact information you're comfortable sharing? Yeah,
for sure. So if you go to www.nixsensor.com, it's NIXSENSOR.com. That's how you can check out the product. We have, videos there, all the testimonials, all the different use cases. It's worth checking out for sure. You can contact me directly for business or for life advice. I do marriage counseling, a lot of things like that. Matt with 2 T's, so MATT at NIXSENSOR.com, Matt at nixsensor.com. And we're gonna have a description of this podcast somewhere, like in text. We'll actually put up a coupon for your viewers on the description, so we'll make that right after this. So we'll put a coupon on the description. You check that out. Get a deal on the product as well.
Wow, that's great. That's very nice of you. Thanks, Matt. That's good. So thanks again, Matt, for taking the time. I really wanted to share your story, and boy, I wish I could sit here for another hour and chat with you. But maybe we'll check in another 6 or 7 months and we can get an update on how things are going. And thanks for the tour of this great facility.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Thanks, Matt. Take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ready Product Radio, part of the Ready PDM network. This is when most podcasters ask you to leave a review on iTunes if you like the show. My only request is if you found the show entertaining, inspiring, or informative, please share it with a colleague or friend who may feel the same way. Also, note that the views expressed in this episode do not necessarily reflect my views or the views of the Ready PDM network. If you want yourself or your product to be ready, then keep your eyes on your markets, your ears to your customers, your mind on their experiences, both good and bad, and finally keep your hearts on your products. Until next time, thank you for listening. You can contact us on Twitter at Ready Product Radio. That's RDYPRODUCTRADIO. And on the web at www.readyproductradio.com.
James, mate, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
You still here? It's over. Go home. Go.